Let's talk about this classic. Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to give you my thoughts on 1984 by George Orwell. Now this is a modern classic. It's pretty well known. A lot of people have read this. I think high schoolers are sometimes assigned this one. I was assigned Animal Farm by George Orwell, not 1984, so I had never read it before. And my son, he had not read it either, so we decided in April to use this as a buddy read and a discussion, and we both enjoyed the discussion. There are some things in it we didn't like about the book, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we did think that it was a thought-provoking book and a book that everyone should read. I think it's an important read, and so I'm going to talk to you about that here. It was published in 1949, and it was sort of groundbreaking in its time for a dystopian novel. I'm not sure the history of dystopians, but I know that this was sort of groundbreaking. Brave New World had been out for a while, and then this came along, and they are well known for the dystopian genre. So I like dystopians. I like the ideas that they explore in a dystopian society. So that's why I wanted to pick this one up. And it's like the main book. If you look up a list of what are the dystopians I should read, usually 1984 is mentioned at the top. So it is an important dystopian to read. With that, I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad that my son and I buddy read it. So here's just a little tip. This book is great for book clubs or buddy reading. This is one that you want somebody else to read with you, because as you go, there are a lot of things to think about, and there are a lot of things to compare this dystopian to your own society. So I think it would be a great one for a buddy read or a book club. Okay, with that, this book is about, again, a dystopian society that is supposedly taking place in 1984. Of course, that's not what happened in 1984. But we follow a man named Winston who works for the party. He works in the historical records department. And in the records department, his job is to alter history. So they send like through these paper shoots these messages, these articles and things, and he is to filter them. So he is to look at what these things say, and he blindly is supposed to go about this. He's not supposed to really think about what he's doing. He's supposed to blindly look at what these articles, these historical documents are saying, and then filter them or alter them so that they support the propaganda of this political party. And so that's his job, and that's the main theme of this story, because as you know, that's a huge problem, because if you are going through and your job is to alter history to support your so-called truth, then we've got a problem. So you can see how this does make for a great discussion. So that's what's going on in the story, and that's how it starts out. The term Big Brother is in this story. That's where we get the term Big Brother, if you've ever heard that, meaning, you know, surveillance, always watching you, always sort of controlling you or trying to control you. And so that's what is happening in the story. So the premise of this is Winston is trying to live in this society and survive at his job, while still having these little thoughts and ideas of his own. And in this particular society, they don't want you to have any thoughts of your own. They want you just to be part of the help for the political party that is in control. So Big Brother there's cameras everywhere. They're always watching you. There's only a few places where you can go that you can truly be by yourself with your thoughts. They don't want you to have your thoughts. And so they're always watching you. There is, the themes in this are a lot about thought and control. So, For instance, in this department, this records department where he works, there's several conversations where he's talking with a person about vocabulary, and there are words being wiped out, words that have already been erased from their vocabulary, words they can't use. Certain words are not allowed to be used, and it's not like they blatantly say, okay, you can't use this word. They do it in another way of just erasing it. So like people disappear and things like that, and you are punished, but the way that they go about it is more of a, no, that's not true, we didn't do that. Even if they did do it, it's erased the next day. If you did something that they didn't agree with and they don't like your story, it doesn't support what they're doing, then you just never existed. So that is the society he is living in. So as I said, one of the main themes of this is surveillance, where Big Brother is always watching you, and the thought police, where your thoughts on your own. So it's a lot about personal freedom, and there's no personal freedom. You don't have freedom because even the clothing and all seems to, there's certain behaviors you can't have within this society. Lots of things that are in the past, there'll be remnants of, like, there's an antique dealer kind of person and he has these little bits and pieces from the past, and it's basic things that we have today, but they're not allowed because they might cause rebellion, because it might bring back a memory or an emotion or a thought. So, you know, we attach a lot to personal belongings, and so those things are not really allowed because that again is emotional, an emotional connection. One of the biggest ones, as I mentioned before, is manipulation. So manipulation of all the information, all his history to fit whatever the agenda is at the time. So everyone has to kind of believe whatever they are reading, and there's constantly this camera in front of you telling you what life is supposed to be at the moment, and you're supposed to just believe that, I guess. So anyway, it's a hard book to read, really, when you think about living in that kind of society. It was tense for me. As the story begins, you sense that Winston is wanting to break free from this society, but he's afraid, and he's also struggling with loyalty to this party. So there's a lot of tension in the beginning because he is being watched the entire time. There is a relationship that he tries to build, and even that is very tense. So yeah, I found that as I was reading this book, I felt a lot of tension as I was reading it. This is not a feel-good sort of book at all. Okay, so my thoughts on reading that just as a fictional piece was the beginning of the story. It starts out wonderfully. I really thought this is going to be a 5-star read. The beginning, the way they set up this dystopian society was super interesting, all about, you know, Big Brother and surveillance and, you know, manipulating words and taking away words. I thought all that was extremely interesting. My son thought the same thing, and we were really enjoying this story. Until the second part. This is divided into 3 parts. The first part is basically setting up the society, and then the second part, the story takes sort of a turn. I won't say because I don't want to spoil the book for you in case you haven't read it. But in the second part, there is a huge chunk of textbook writing, what I call textbook writing. He receives this sort of pamphlet or these books about the society, and he sits down to read them. And so those chapters are basically him reading those books. So verbatim, we get the textbook. To me, we don't need that in this story. I thought that the second part should not even been in this book, because we've already set up the dystopian society. We already know what the society is. But in that one, it was like a sermon. He was preaching the ideals of this dystopian society. And I thought it was overboard. It was like, okay, get on with it. I found myself just wanting to skim through it because it was boring. It was totally unnecessary to this story. And it took me completely out because I felt like I was in school reading an encyclopedia. So the second part really took it down for me, and my son felt the same way. In the third part, when there is another turn of events in the book, it went back to tension, and it was super tense in the end. Super tense in the end. However, I didn't like the ending. I just wasn't satisfied by the ending. And maybe I'm not supposed to be, because it is supposed to be this dystopian society that is, you know, a horrible place to be. So you don't want to be living in this 1984. But overall, I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was an important read. I loved the beginning, the idea of Big Brother and the setup of the story. But that second part was just way too long and way too much for this one. So that's why I did knock it down. And then by the end, I don't know, it was just some of the things at the end. I didn't like the way it went at the end, but that's just my opinion. And so I do encourage you to read 1984 if you haven't read it. A little side note for 1984, this is the copy I read from. It's a beautiful copy. It's a paperback, and it was a joy to read because it's floppy, and I loved this edition. But my son used one of my other, he borrowed my other hardcover because he doesn't have a copy of it, and it's the Penguin cloth bound. And I want you to look at this. This is how it looks originally. But then after he read it, this is all gone. This was all covered in that. And now it's completely gone. So it rubbed off as he read it. And he did not take this anywhere. It was on his nightstand. He read just the chapters we were reading that night. It wasn't like he was taking it anywhere. He's an adult. He doesn't, you know, he takes care of his books. And inside as well, as he was reading, he would get a little black marking on his hands. So really disappointed in this book, because this was not a cheap book. I received this for birthday or Christmas or something, maybe a year or so ago. So I was disappointed in that. I do not recommend getting this Penguin cloth bound, although it's beautiful to begin with. But once you read it, it fades and falls off literally into your hands. So I do recommend this edition because I enjoyed reading it from here. So with that, if you are interested in dystopians and you do read 1984, I also wanted to recommend Animal Farm. I actually started reading this again this morning just because I was in the mood for it. I told my son, I said, I'm going to read Animal Farm. So he was like, well, I'll read it with you. So we're going to buddy read this because I've read this a couple of times. Maybe 3 times, because I really enjoyed this one, and it's super short. It takes you a day to read. But this time we're going to take it really slow, and we're going to do the same thing we did with 1984, and we're going to read a little each day for a while. Not a month, because it was certainly, you know, you'd be doing a paragraph a day. But we're going to take a little bit each day and read it really slow so that we can discuss each chapter of this book thoroughly. And so I'm excited about that. Again, I've read this several times, and I've also read a graphic novel that's really good of this one too. So if you are interested in George Orwell's work, you might want to pick up Animal Farm. This is an allegory. It is a political type story too, but it's about these farm animals who rebel against the man, the farmer. So I really find that one to be an interesting discussion starter as well. And also I was thinking about some other books that are dystopian in case you're interested. And one that I thought of a lot when I was reading 1984 that I really enjoy is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is about a dystopian society that is being controlled very similarly to the way that 1984 is trying to control. But this one is about the books. And of course, being a book lover, you probably would enjoy that. Again, this is by Ray Bradbury. I'm not sure if I said that or not. So that's a favorite for me. And then last year, I read The Giver by Lois Lowry. I just finished reading all of these. There's a quartet. This is a series. There's 4 of these. And I just finished it. I read The Giver last year and loved it. It is a great one. But this is a YA or middle grade dystopian. And then finally, my son has read, but I haven't read this one yet, but he recommends this one, Brave New World by Huxley. He enjoyed reading Brave New World, but it's not his favorite book because, you know, I don't have an opinion. I haven't read it yet. I will be reading it, though, because he keeps encouraging me to read it. I will say, though, he read this in high school, and I remember as he was reading it, even though he said he didn't enjoy it, he talked about this every day. Every time he would finish reading, he would come discuss what he had read. So he obviously was super interested in the whole concept of this dystopian society, the premise. But when we talk about it, he's like it wasn't his favorite book or anything. So I'm not sure, but it sounds like it's thought-provoking, just like 1984 or Animal Farm or The Giver or Fahrenheit 451. So anyway, I thought I would mention a few other books in case you're interested. If you do read 1984, or if you've read 1984 and are trying to look for another dystopian type book to read. And then I also looked up some adaptations because I'd like to watch an adaptation. If you've watched any of these, let me know if they're worth the watch. So I found that there was a 1984 that came out in 1956. It's a black and white film adaptation, and it's directed by Michael Anderson. I don't know anything about that one because I haven't seen any of these. There was another one, a 1984, that came out in 1984. And then there's one called Brazil, and it came out in 1985. And it says it's not a direct adaptation of 1984, but Brazil draws heavily on 1984, the novel. So I don't know anything about these, but I was interested in watching one. If you have seen a film adaptation of 1984 or any of these other dystopians that you found to be interesting, let me know in the comments. And let me know if you've read 1984 or if you plan on it, or another dystopian you might think that I should read next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.